That's impressive.
No, she wasn't. It looks good on you, Charlie. David asked me if he could take this, and I said no. Charlie called me Wednesday afternoon. I'm following Steve Byram. Yeah, I can figure something out in 2.5 days. I'll be glad to. Sure, go ahead and take it. Chris, do you want to tell your joke? I'll be glad to. Come on up here. I want to hear it. You just got me a trick. Can you make your way up here? Oh, come on. Come on. I'm trying to kill time. How much time do I have? Clean it up? Oh, she'll have to clean it up. Chris?
Lee's got one too.
Oh, Lee's got one too. Oh, go ahead and tell us, Chris. While I'm finding what I'm going to talk about.
Much time as you need. You're the one's got to be upstairs.
Dude, really? So, somebody tell me when it's about, what time do y'all usually get out, really, seriously? 20 after? 10 after? 10 o'clock when Steve's not preaching. Somebody about 10:20 raise your hand, and that'll give me time to wrap up by 10:25. Chris, are you talking now?
I guess so. Al's preaching up at Lookout Mountain today. I should have gone with it.
We'll determine how well this joke goes.
I'm not prepared, and I'm not sure it's a Sunday school joke. But anyway, there was a man in his attic cleaning it out one day when a genie saw a bottle, and a genie came out of the bottle, and he said, "You have 4 wishes." So he wished for a fancy sports car, and voila, there it was. And then his second wish, he wanted the back seat filled with money. And lo and behold, before his eyes there appeared, the whole back seat of his car was filled with money. And then he said he'd like to have a blonde gal, and she appeared in the front seat with him. And then he put the sports car on the road, and he said, "I'm going to take a while to think about this 4th one." And so as he's cruising down the road, he's feeling good about the whole situation, and he starts singing, "Oh, I wish I were a Oscar Mayer."
What time is it? Yeah, see what I have to follow. Just had to ask. I ain't gonna make that segue. Let's see if I can. That may take a while with all that. That is something. Be careful what you ask for. That's right. And I'll make that segue with that. Be careful what you ask for. Judy and I have been making our way around to some Sunday school classes, so you need to be careful what you ask for. I did my doctorate work on postmodernism, and when I was thinking about today, we're in the middle of a cultural shift, and so I wanted to talk to you a little bit about postmodernism. I'm not going to bring all my doctoral work out, but there's a book that I would encourage you if you're interested in the future of the church. See, I see my responsibility as senior pastor is not what we're doing right now. Where's the culture going to be? Where are we going to be? How are we going to address the culture in the future, and what's happening in our culture? Almost like a scout going out trying to find water for a watering hole. To me, that's to be visionary, to look forward to see where we are and where we're going. You look at Acts 1, and it says when Jesus was about to be taken up into heaven, some of them met together and they asked him, "Lord, are you at this time going to restore the kingdom of Israel?" And he said, "It's not for you to know the times or the dates as set by its own authority, but you'll receive power when the Holy Spirit has come on you, and you'll be my witnesses in Jerusalem and Judea and Samaria and to the ends of the earth." And what I look at that passage and I think about is be careful what you ask for. Because It went to Jerusalem. Jerusalem was a center of power and authority. The disciples weren't used to being in Jerusalem, whether you like to admit that or not. When they went to Jerusalem, Jesus went to Jerusalem, what happened? There's always trouble. He's always getting himself in trouble. Didn't matter when it was, didn't matter what happened, he was always in trouble when he went to Jerusalem. That's why the disciples said to him sometimes, are you sure why don't we just keep on going? Let's go to Galilee or somewhere. Let's don't go back to Jerusalem. And then you move on into Galilee. Galilee was, all Judea was pretty familiar. Samaria was not. Samaria was foreign. And I'm sure Steve has talked to you and others have talked to you. Samaritans were always despised. It was so bad that if you had a Samaritan stick his footprint in or her footprint in the sand, you would put straw in it and burn it because you didn't want to see any sign of them even being in your community. That's why Jesus talked about who? The Good Samaritan. It was turning the world upside down. He could have chosen anybody, but he chose the Samaritan because that's who they were often most opposed to, and they were affiliated with it. And then into all the world, to the ends of the earth, to the Gentiles. Now, how does this deal with where we are in our world today? They were going into new territory. This was something totally different. You take the Acts is full of changes. The Jerusalem Council, Acts 15. What do we do with these Gentiles and circumcision and food articles and all that? You had the Council of Trent that dealt with different cultural experiences and how do we deal with this Christology. Phyllis Tickle has a book out. Anybody know Phyllis Tickle? You ever look at her? Phyllis? She's a church historian, but she has a book out called The Great Emergence. As you're in the middle of a cultural shift, you don't always know what to do. And I think we're in the middle of one of those shifts. She has an idea, and I think it's a pretty good idea. I don't like reading this, but I didn't have time to make copies for everybody. But she says every 500 years there's a cultural shift the church has to address. And I wanted to read just a little bit of that to you. If I read real slow, we'll be through pretty quickly. Okay? And I don't usually do this, but I wanted to read this. We talk about this postmodernism, but she talks about it as a cultural shift. And I wanted to take a moment to just highlight some of this. She says 500 years back from our 21st century places us in the 16th century, so what is now being called the Great Reformation. Great was part of the term. So if then 500 years back from our time takes us to the Great Reformation. Now what was the Great Reformation? Martin Luther, right? Martin Luther was the Great Reformation. You had, Judy and I were, and we didn't have time to stop, but we were in Switzerland, Zurich. It's Zwingli's home church. It was 150 years of those 500 years of the Reformation was last year, and it was closed and we couldn't get in, but I walked around it anyway, and wasn't picked up for being looking awful or whatever. In 1054, there was another great schism, and that was between Pope Leo the Ninth had a schism, and so you move back from there to what? Constantinople. You keep on moving back. So as she talks about this. And then you're going back into this calling where the disciples went out. They brought change to the world. We're in the middle of a cultural shift. This isn't Kansas anymore. Church is having to figure out how to do things differently in this age of technology. And I don't know about you, but things are happening so quickly we can't keep up with them. The church is always having a harder time changing and adapting to what's happening in our world. And I don't want to bore you with all of that, but I think that as we look at our churches changing, I mean, the world changing, our church is changing as we know, not First-Centenary, but the church, the way the church works. It was George Hunter that called it, we're going almost back to post-apostolic times. And what does that mean? Well, it means that many people, when you mention, I'm going to talk about, imagine, I'm going to talk about Jesus this morning in my sermon. That's an awful idea, isn't it? But you mention the word Jesus, many people may not know who you're talking about as you're talking about it. And people say, oh, surely they do. Well, many people, when you mention Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, don't get it. Peter, Paul, and Mary is much. And so we continue to use our words and our terminology, and the culture is having a hard time figuring it out. They're not understanding what we're talking about. And I've spent the last 15 years of my life in the midst of this, because I've got to be honest with you, I'm getting close to retirement. I have to retire within the next 12 years. If my body holds up and all, I don't like that word, because I don't think, as Al has talked about, you don't retire, you just do something else. And I think that we look at that. But there's a part of me that just says, you know what, can't we just keep things as they are? You know, it was okay, it was working. And yet the culture is demanding that we respond in some way. Our United Methodist churches are closing at an alarming rate, as well as other churches. Not First-Centenary, but there are churches. You look around Chattanooga, how many churches have closed in Chattanooga in the last 10 years? And how many more churches are going to continue to close? And it's our part as people of God to say, okay, we've got Jesus, and we're going to share him like you want him, or you don't get him. You know, my grandmother used to have green beans and mashed potatoes and fried chicken. I don't like fried chicken, sorry. A lot of y'all do, and that's great. If you would take it off the bone and clean it up and get all that gristle out of there and all that stuff, I'd eat it. But sometimes the culture is asking for something else. And it's still just as healthy. It's still as valuable. And I think that as we continue to move forward in our church as a culture, how do we respond? Let me stop there. Any questions before we move on? Anything to think about? Anybody have a question you want to ask? Thoughts? In our modern world, why, Charlie, don't ask any questions. Yes, David.
Epistles to wives of the apostles.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe. All right. But as you think about it in our modern world, as we went in our modern world, there was this idea that you really didn't. If you could think it, you could build it, and if you could build it, you could maintain it. And you really didn't need God. I mean, you depended upon yourself. You could do it. You could make it happen. And there's something about this postmodern world that we need to realize. They're looking for spiritual growth. They're asking for the holy and the mysterious. They're looking. Do you know what the fastest growing? We talk about our contemporary worship, and you know what one of the fastest growing contemporary worships is? It's candles, acoustic music, and something soft and silent. And people are flocking to that. I was talking to Charlie Self the other day. Do you know who's coming to be missionaries in the Silicon Valley realm? The Asian church and the Australian church are coming back to us. And I think that there's some of this stuff that we talk about. Some people think these are horrible times and, returns to good old days. I just think they're exciting. I think we churches have to learn how to adapt. In every 500 years, the church has had to learn, what do you do with the Reformation and the printing press? How do we use this material? How do we make it happen? And then you move to the next level. And every 500 years, the church has had to learn how to deal with it. How do we use the technology? How do we deal with this cultural shift and change? All right. Any questions or anything? Any thoughts? Comments? Anything? See, if I do such a bad job, you won't ask me back. That's good. There's a book called Canoeing the Mountains. And it's one of the better books. I don't know, Dave, did you have a chance to read that? It's one of the better books. If you're interested in figuring out where the culture's going and thinking about where the church is heading and how the church addresses that, this is a great book. Because it talks in there about the mission of the church is still the same. What's the mission of the church?
Make disciples.
Make disciples. Right? That's the mission of the church. Even though culture changes, the mission of the church is still to make disciples. And we, as leaders of the community or leaders in our church, have to see how do we continue to make disciples. Sometimes it's green beans and mashed potatoes. Other times it's peas and carrots. They're both healthy. They're both important. They're both viable. And churches that refuse to adapt are dying very quickly. And over the next 10 years, you're going to continue to see more churches close. I drive by a church when I come in on Sunday mornings. I drive by a church on Dayton Boulevard for sale sign. I drive by another church that's turned into some kind of restaurant. And you look at this along the way and you see this. Todd, the writer here, says that the Spirit of God goes before us. It was God that was leading them from Samaria to the ends of the earth, to the Gentiles, to the unaccustomed, to the unfamiliar. He compares it to Lewis and Clark. You know, they had canoed all the way to the end of the Missouri River. And their expedition, I like what it says here. I'm going to read a part of this to you. I've got all kinds of notes, but Chris took too long on a joke. I'm not going to share all of them. Here's what their mission was, though. To Captain Meriwether Lewis, the object of your mission is to explore the Missouri River and such principal stream of it as by its course in communication with the waters to the Pacific Ocean may offer the most direct and practicable water communication across this continent for the purposes of commerce. And that was Thomas Jefferson to Meriwether Lewis. And I want to read a part of this to you as here's what Lewis does as he gets to the end of the Missouri River. For over 300 years, explorers of at least 4 sovereign nations have been looking for a water route that would connect the Pacific Ocean to the Mississippi River. And everyone just knew it was out there somewhere. It was a broadly believed, persistent assumption about the way the world was arranged. This assumption not only inspired Lewis and Clark's journey, but fueled a frantic race for profits and power. President Jefferson had indeed commissioned Lewis and Clark in the core of discovery for just this moment, declaring that they should find the cherished water route everyone believed existed and would ensure the nation's prosperity, the most direct and practical water communication across the continent for the purpose of commerce. It says, the road we took the most distant fountain of waters of the mighty Missouri, in which we had spent so much toilsome days and restless nights. Thus far I had accomplished one of the great objects, and this is from Meriwether Lewis. Here I halted a few minutes and rested myself 2 miles below McNeil, had exultantly stood with a foot on each side of this rivulet and thanked to God that He lived to be astride the mighty and heretofore deemed endless Missouri. After refreshing ourselves, we proceeded on to the top of the dividing ridge, which I discovered immense ranges of high mountains still to the west, the tops partially covered with snow. He had been given the idea that once he got to the end of the Missouri, he would find what? Level plains, more just like he had seen. And when he got to that part, he saw what? Rocky Mountains. That's right. And so what did he have to do? He stayed to the mission. What was the mission? To discover new lands and new territory. And what he did was he traded in his canoes for horses. He changed from being a river rat to a mountain climber. And as I read more of this story, I thought about how many of you all have, well, that's a dumb question. How many of us are not from immigrant families? Did anybody ever have a family that moved out west that was part of the movement that went west? Anybody ever had anybody that grew to the west? It's interesting. As they made their way west, they often let go of the things that weren't necessary. Throwing out shiver robes, throwing out organs, throwing out stuff. When it says in Acts that you will be my witnesses in Jerusalem and Judea and Samaria to the ends of the earth, it's saying throw out everything that's not necessary and stick to the mission. And that mission is to make disciples. And I think that's pretty much what we have to remember. You have to remind me of often, and I have to remind you of it. Todd Bolsinger wrote in here, it's not only anymore that you can preach well. It's not only anymore that you provide excellent care. It's not only anymore that you have dynamic worship, because preachers are dropping out left and right because they're worn out and they're disillusioned and discouraged, because what they learned in seminary is no longer what they're having to adapt and develop themselves in new ways. Over the last 35 years of ministry, I've had to reinvent myself 3 times to adapt to the changing scenery. And I'm going to have to, I'm still in this process, and I'm just sharing a little bit of where I am today. I'm still having to adapt myself to this changing culture. And what it is that what he suggests is that you still stick to the mission, making disciples in the name of Christ. All right, I'm going to stop there. Any questions? I've got all kinds of notes. Anything else? Anybody have a question for me? Thoughts? Here's 5 principles. I'm going to leave those with you. What time we have?
20 after.
20 after? 5 principles. All right. The world in front of us is nothing like the world behind us. It's going to continue to change. I've heard this that, well, people don't know Jesus anymore, and people don't know the stories anymore, and people don't know this anymore, and the world's not like it was. And we ought to say, what a great opportunity we have to let people know. But it comes, if you want to know what a postmodern person is looking for, here's what they're looking for. You better be real, and you better be authentic. Don't come with this canned illustration of what church is and what it means to somebody else. You and I have to understand that our witness is more important these days than it used to be. You can't just do church. It has to be living church in our lives, every day of our lives, and that's where you and I come in. There's a generation that's been conned. If you follow Jesus, I'm going to give you this. And I'll talk a little bit about that this morning. Second thing is, no one's going to follow us off the map unless they trust us. You ever thought about that? Lewis and Meriwether Lewis had people who followed him because they trusted him. And, I think that trust is built up over a period of time. I'll share with you all, I stay awake at night about what's going to happen in February with some decisions that we have to make as a church. It keeps me awake at night. And the thing that I told the district superintendent that worries me some, and I know this, I know when I said this in a class there, you know how long it takes, and I'll prove it to you, you know how long it takes for you all to trust your senior pastor? 4 years. One sermon. But to be able to share and deal with and be in life together and know that I'm not going to do something stupid or that I'm not going to do something that will embarrass you on purpose, those kind of things. And we're in the middle of, headed into new territory, and I'm not sure I have that trust capital. And I want you to pray for me, okay? I need that. And I need your prayers and your support and your guidance. We're going to be fine through this time. It's just a new territory. And we'll be all right. I promise you that. If we just stick together and stick to what? What's the mission? Make disciples in the name of Jesus Christ. The other part is that leading off the map requires adaptation. We may have to do a few things differently in the future. Y'all have already done that. Many churches have done that. You've added contemporary service. You've done things differently. But we may continue to have to do things differently. It's not about people coming to the church anymore. It's about the church continuing as it was, go out in all the world. It's going outside these worlds and being the church out in the world, making a difference in the world. Another thing is you can't do it alone. Too many times we've paid the professionals to do ministry. And I had someone come up to me after the service this morning, and they were talking about been involved in this, and talking about all the ways involved. Gordon Gooden said this to me, and I thought it was interesting. He said, you come to First-Centenary, and you just have to help people do what they do. And that's to be out in the world, and that's what y'all are called to do. Continue to do what you do, is be out in the world, living your lives, following Christ, and making a difference. But we can't do it alone. I am so glad that Steve's in here. Y'all have one of the best resources in the world. I mean that. He travels all over the place. And that's why I was sort of humbled coming in here today. I thought, golly, Don. And Charlie gave me 2 days to do it. Transformation will happen if you stick with it. That's one of his guiding principles here. Just stick with it. Stay with it. I want to close with that. You know, I playing basketball, in the 8th grade, I decided I wanted to play basketball. I was a great baseball player. Probably could have played, and I just gave it up because I was so good at it, it bored me after a while. And I mean that. It did. I walked up one day and Dad said, what are you doing? I said, well, it's just not interesting to me anymore. It's not a challenge. And I wasn't as good as I thought I was, but I was better than some thought I was. But I started playing basketball, and so I'd spend 3 or 4 hours in the gym every day, every week, same routine over and over and over again. And I can remember getting to one point, I just said, you know, I can't do this. I'm too short. I'm not going to make the NBA. And my dad said to me, you know, just stick with it. Just stay the course. Stay the course. And what I did was, I finally, I kept after it, and I, in the 11th grade, started for Hickson High School, and 12th grade started, but it was because somebody encouraged me to stay the course. And I'm going to live up to my mission statement, to bring hope and encouragement to all. I want y'all to know, and I've been talking to other Sunday school classes about this too, we're going to stay the course. We're going to continue to do what we do, and we'll adapt and change if we need to adapt and change, but we're going to stick to the mission. And that mission is to make disciples for Christ. If you think at some point that you would like to come and talk to me, please do so. Would love to. I don't do emails very well. I can't answer them. You know how long it takes me to write an email? I had to, technology has changed so much. Just set up some time out and come talk to me. I'd love to talk with you about it. Anybody have a question for me? Anything?
I have one question.
Please.
Have you ever tried a chicken dinner?
What? I have had an Oscar Mayer wiener, but I'm not I haven't tried it. Yes, I've tried a chicken dinner, and they're not any good either. Chicken tender. It's still chicken. It doesn't matter how you can fricassee it or whatever, and dress it up and casserole it and everything else. It's still chicken. All right. God never intended for you to eat chicken. All right. Yes, sir. Question? Somebody have a question? Anybody?
What is our verse today that we can study the rest of the week and think about all you said today?
Charlie, did I have to have it? Was I supposed to have a verse today? Acts 1.
That's what we come for.
Acts 1, verses 1 through 8. Talk about that sense of going in all the world. Other thoughts, other questions, anybody? Anything? Good, I'm glad. Thank you all for letting me be here.